well, that was her reality, living in these dreams. And they're often very dark and very terrifying. So it was a very, very distressing illness. It was a real assault to my faith in lots of ways, because I assumed that this godly woman would, like you're saying, would just go peacefully to heaven, you know, be honoured in her last days. And yet this wasn't the reality, you know. So even that is a real, took a lot of soul searching.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Oakes, and welcome to Finding the Light. Today I'm catching up with Alison Shaw. Now, a couple of years ago, Alison wrote a book called There's a Dog in My Garden. It's the story of Alison's journey alongside her mum, as her mum was diagnosed with Lewy Body Dementia and subsequently passed away. Lewy Body Dementia is quite a rare form of dementia, but I know a little bit about dementia myself because my mum actually had some before she passed away. Now, my mum once said to me that death is part of life, and at the time I thought, wow, that's really morbid, but in fact, it's true. But I don't know how good we are at talking about death. I certainly don't know how good we are preparing for death, and I have to say that nothing prepares you for the loss of a parent. So I'm looking forward to chatting with Alison today, to finding more of her journey, but also what I'm really looking forward to is hearing about how she encountered God's presence, how He sustained her through a 7-year period.
Yeah, I mean, I took quite a lot of coercion to write a book, you know, so it was actually the manager of the last care facility that my mum was in who kept saying to me, oh, you need to write a book, you should write a book. So if it, you know, if it can help someone else, then yes, I will do that, you know. So there began the journey of writing. I'd sit down in an evening and I'd start to write. And I had quite a lot of content from journaling because I had journaled right through the time of her illness. And so I'd sit down and write, and then I'd get Peter, my husband, to come and he'd read it as well. And then we would cry as we recalled what the journey had been like and what we'd gone through. So in actual fact, writing the book was very cathartic. It was actually a healing process for myself and for Peter. I always think it's interesting how God, we think we're doing one thing, but God's actually got another thing going on in the background. So the book was for other people, but was for me as well.
Yeah, you know, I always believe that books are actually for the authors. They are for other people too.
Yeah, yeah.
So how long after your mum died did you actually start writing the book?
Oh, fairly quickly, yeah. So I knew that if I didn't grab that opportunity, if I put it off, then it wasn't going to happen. So I was very intentional, and once you start thinking, the ideas come, and like the idea for the title came really quickly, and then I just, yeah, it wasn't difficult in terms of formatting it. It was very natural because I was telling my story.
Yeah. So tell us about your mum. What was she like, and what was she like when you were growing up as a family?
Oh, she was your personification of a wonderful mother. You know, she was a homemaker. She was, yeah, devoted her life basically to her children. She never worked outside of the home, so she volunteered in a lot of different capacities. And, you know, there was all the home baking and the knitting and the sewing and all those things. But she was a strong Christian, so she had a lovely faith. She was a very jolly person, so a lot of fun, and a very loving person. And extremely hospitable. There were always people in our home, people staying or people for meals, or, yeah, so she was, in many ways, she was my role model.
Right.
Yeah.
So your parents started getting older and needing more support, so you and your husband Peter decided that you'd all come together and live. In fact, it's in the house that we're in now.
Yeah.
How was that adjustment to that intergenerational living?
We decided to be really intentional about this, set an example really in some ways to the generations after us that it's important to care for our elders. So, and in many ways, you know, Peter was amazing because it was his in-laws. Mum was excited. Dad maybe a little bit reluctant, but they moved in with us, and we were in this home, and there was my sister as well. She lived with us too, and then one of our sons was still at home, so it kind of became the whānau house. And as well as that, my daughter and the grandchildren were very close by, so the intergenerational living was fantastic, really great.
And I know you sort of talk about that in the book, that particularly sort of Western society, it's, you know, the grandparents, you know, they'll go off to a rest home and nursing home, but you were very resistant to doing that, right?
I wanted to model a different way, that I had worked in the aged care sector, and I struggled with the fact of the attitude that I don't want to look after my parents, I want to pay someone else to do it so I can get on with my life. But there's a two-sided coin to that, because I know even for us growing up, the narrative from our parents was we don't want to be a burden. So subtly that makes you think, oh gosh, you're a burden. So if you're saying, you know, so then that influences your decisions. A lot of other cultures, it wouldn't ever be done this way around.
Yeah,
so,
it's just totally normal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Alison, when did you first notice that things weren't quite right with your mum?
Always in hindsight, you can see more than actually, because when you're living with someone, it just becomes kind of normal. But there were some things that stood out, and in particular was the fact that she was seeing things. And that's what marks Lewy Body Dementia out from other forms of dementia, is hallucinations.
Okay.
So the very first, and that's why the name of the book is There's a Dog in the Garden. So just out of the window here behind me, she could see a dog. She could also see children that weren't there, but in her mind they were. That was her reality. And then there were little things around the home that were kind of unusual, that just her perception of what things were. So, and some of this was really sad, and I say it respectfully, but at one stage she's wiping the bench with a piece of toast, not the dishcloth. Yeah, and other things. I think one of the final straw was when she had matches and she was trying to light the TV because she thought it was the wood burner. So there's all those perception things, and you realise we have no idea what's going on inside people's brains. But yeah, like I said, Lewy Body Dementia is different in that there's hallucinations, and I guess I kind of liken it to being in a dream. So, you know, sometimes when you have a dream and it's very real, often scary, and you wake up and you're like, oh, I was only a dream, and there's a sense of relief. Well, that was her reality, living in these dreams, and they're often very dark and very terrifying. So it was a very, very distressing illness.
Did you find sometimes, though, in those times when she was doing unusual things, did you sort of almost feel like you didn't know whether to laugh or to cry?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, initially we're just jollying her along. Oh, Mum, you know, the socks don't go in the fridge. I'd say, Mum, there's no dog in the garden. You know, we've never had a dog, and desperately trying to bring them back into reality, because you don't want to accept the fact that things might be heading downhill. But realised that that wasn't helping her. That was actually making her confused and actually demeaning or disrespectful, because it was real to her. We entered into her reality.
Yes.
So instead of saying there is no dog in the garden, I'd say I'd go get rid of the dog, and I'd open the door and go, shh, get away, like this. And then she felt validated.
And she probably felt safe.
Yeah. And so I think that's what we did. I mean, as the hallucinations got worse, she couldn't verbalise what she was actually seeing. So then you've got and this is upsetting, then you've got the screaming. And I know that there are times when she'd be shouting, help, help, help. And we didn't know what she's seeing, but often she was drowning. So there was the ocean was coming into her room. She was actually drowning, so she was crying for help, you know. But the eyes are wide open, and if you're in the room, you think that she's yelling at you.
Kind of like when children have night terrors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think there were other times when, and I felt it hurtful that it's so misunderstood. You know, people say, oh, be quiet. Why does your mother shout so much? You know, she was actually trying to help whatever situation she was in. And a real classic example of that was one time when they were in one of the care homes, and it was dinner time, and Mum saw, we only found this out afterwards, but Mum saw gas gas masks coming down in the dining room, and everybody needed to put them on because everybody was going to die.
Wow.
So she's trying to go around each table and tell them, you need to do this, or we need to get out, we need to evacuate this building. And she told Dad as well. And of course, people just think you're crazy, but in her mind, what she was seeing was real. So, and to her credit, she decided it was up to her to go and get help. So she headed out, this elderly woman in her slippers, headed out to try to get help to save everybody in the rest time, That's heroic.
It is.
And no one noticed that she'd gone. And then I got a call from a petrol station. It's almost 2 kilometres down the road. And they just said, look, we've got a lady here and we want to know if you know anything about her. And just miraculously, I don't know how, she remembered our phone number.
Wow.
And he described her to me, and I said, yes, that's my mum. And I said, I'll come right now. So I headed off, and she'd walked a long way. And of course, I'm thinking, what on earth are you doing? Why did you leave? And don't you know it's nighttime and anything could happen to you, and you would be lost, and none of us. So I'm having all this thing going on in my head, not knowing the backstory. And so then I get her in the car and I try to talk to her about it. And how can I take her back there if she thinks they're trying to kill you, And so there's this incredibly distressing thing going on in your own life of, how do I manage this? What do I do here? So I took her back, and then I went in and got the manager, and the manager came out, and she was lovely. She tried to reassure Mum. She said, I'll get everything checked and we'll make sure the place is safe, and, and took her back in. But, that's an example of how complex it is, that if you don't know the backstory, people just respond to the behaviour, and it might be aggressive and it might be unpleasant and really, really difficult to navigate as a daughter who loved her mum.
Mm. Did the doctors give her medication for that sort of thing?
They say, it's a progressive neurodegenerative disease. There's no cure. Basically, they can sedate. But when older people have got other complexities going on with their health, the sedation can be really detrimental to their physical ability to eat or to walk or that sort of thing. So it's a balancing act. So the focus is on care, of managing it. And that's the challenge, and that's what I bring out in my book. It was the 4th home that she was in that was a specialist dementia care that understood what was going on, and that made all the difference.
Mm. So we were talking earlier, and that you had Mum at home, and then obviously she had to go into a home that got to that point where, your desire as a daughter to have her here, to look after her and have her with family, it couldn't be that way anymore. That must have been a really tough decision.
It was really hard. There's a lot of guilt around that, a lot of have we betrayed them, said we'd look after you, and then we didn't, or we couldn't. So those are really deep emotions of, a sense of shame, a sense of betrayal, a sense of, are we making the right decision for you, a sense of abandonment, all of the above. And those are really difficult emotions to work through, really hard. It's like you're between a rock and a hard place, Mum, it was no longer safe for Mum to be here, so we had to think, do one of us give up our job? At that point, Dad was in care because he had Parkinson's. So really our feeling was that they'd been married for 60 years, they need to be together. We don't know whether that was the right decision or not, but you make the decision at the time. But in many ways, it was very, very distressing for Dad as well to watch his wife go down this really dark journey. There were other times when she turned on us because of what she was seeing or her perception of us, and I think I think Dad really suffered a lot when she turned on him. There were times when she accused him of having affairs with the staff and all that kind of stuff, and she'd say some pretty harsh things. And I think probably that was one of the hardest times for me when she turned on me as well. Accused me of mistreatment and abuse and all this stuff in front of a caregiver. And I just thought, man, I've given up my, I've stopped my life to care for you, And those are tough. And you get this, really hard, really hard.
I remember when we went to choose a nursing home, a rest home for my mum, that's such a hard thing to go through, right? And I know you talk about it a little bit in your book, because you just mentioned that, you know, your mum, I think it was her fourth one that she ended up with, was the right thing. And you made mention of, you know, it wasn't about all the bells and whistles, it was about the quality of care. And it was funny because me and my siblings sort of had this thing where the two of us would, my sister and I would talk to the person, maybe the admissions person, we'd chat with them, we'd learn all about the facility. But my brother just wandered around and got the feel for the place, and he talked to some of the residents, and he wanted to see how happy they were. And it's so important, isn't it, to find the right fit?
Yeah, absolutely. In that place, it was all about the person. And also that wasn't a place for elderly people, that was a place for people from maybe 50s. And when we first went in, their mum was one of the oldest. So this isn't a disease for the elderly, you know, this is a disease that, and not all of them had the similar, had Lewy body, but they all had illnesses that resulted in confronting behaviour or aggressive behaviour or different behaviour. But the staff there got to know each person. Yeah. And then they'd get to know who they were. And you know, these people, all people that had, you know, amazing backstories. There was one lovely gentleman there that had been a lecturer in anthropology. You know, there was someone else who'd been an early childhood teacher. There's someone else that had been an importer of soft furnishings. You know, like, so across all sectors of society. And yet these people were struggling, you know, with what was going on in their brains. And the staff were just amazing.
Yeah. I remember my mum always saying to me that she wanted to die in her sleep, you know, like that's a really nice way to die, right? And I remember when she had her stroke and then she was in the hospital for a number of months, and then it was evident that she was never going to be able to go home again. And so she needed specialist nursing care. And I just remember feeling a bit angry, actually, like, what, my mother, who's taken good care of herself all her life and eats well and does all the right things and exercises. And did you ever feel that it just felt a bit unfair?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. It was a real assault to my faith in lots of ways, because I assumed that this godly woman would, like you're saying, would just go peacefully to heaven, you know, be honoured in her last days, and yet this wasn't the reality. So even that took a lot of soul searching. You know, I must say all through this journey, my faith carried me hugely, but there was always this underlying thing, oh my goodness, you know, this is horrific. Why would this happen, you know? And I really wrestled with a lot of that. Her end days was so difficult, and I also wrestled with the fact that it was so consuming that I couldn't remember who she was, what she was like. And that really bothered me as well, because I didn't want these last years to be my only memory, to be what defined her. And that was only like 7 years out of her 80 years, and it didn't define her. But in that moment, in those moments, it was really, really difficult. But I often went out by myself, especially in the difficult moments where I felt like I couldn't cope. And God always gave me a verse, you know. I remember one time, the only time actually that she didn't know who I was, and just looking at me and not knowing who I was. And I thought, oh my goodness, is this our new reality? You know, that she doesn't even know me now. And that night I drove out to the beach. I was by Lion Rock at Piha, just saying, God, how do I do this? Just that verse came to mind, you know, from the ends of the earth I cry. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And I was sitting there looking at Lion Rock, and I'm at the ends of the earth, and just God reassured me. And then another verse he gave me is, and a mother forget her nursing child, even if she should, I will never forget you. And at that point, I wondered if that was the case. But, you know, just those beautiful, reassuring words that God gives to us. But the why question is really big, Lizzie. It's really big, you know, that, and in many ways, you can get stuck there.
You know, you trust God, you believe in God, and yet this just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I should say through this time I was seeing a counsellor as well, and she really gave me tools of how to do this. But the why thing really had to be between me and God. Yeah. And eventually I realised that by asking why with an attitude, I was actually pushing God away, saying, oh, why did you let this happen? So I was actually pushing him away. And then I realised that wasn't helping me. I actually needed his comfort. I needed his support. I needed his closeness. So there was a defining moment when I realised that my need of his presence was greater than my need of an answer.
He doesn't promise us an easy ride. He says you'll have tribulation, but he does say that I'll always be with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the other verse that really helped me was in Job, when he gets sick and his wife says, "I'll just curse God and die," you know, and he says, should we accept only good from the hand of God and not adversity? Was my faith big enough to allow for adversity in terms of my mother's life, you know, and the impact it had on my life? Yeah, so it's getting that perspective. But also our pastor talks a lot about a mystery box, that things that are too hard to understand or too hard for us to reconcile with our faith, to put them in the mystery box and just say, okay, I'm going to put it there. It's not going to stop me. It's not going to, it's not going to be a stumbling block on my faith. I'm just going to set it there, place it there and let it sit there and be okay with mystery, to be okay with things that don't make sense. So one of the most distressing things for me was in terms of her faith. Had she lost her faith? Had she lost, could she no longer feel God's presence? Could she no longer pray? How do you cope with it, where that's the core, that's the most important thing in your life, and that really hurt me as well. I thought, oh God, that's her lifeline, and of course we'd pray with her and that, but a friend gave me that verse from Romans 8 that said nothing can separate us from the love of God, nothing, and not height nor depth, not dementia, not Lewy Body Dementia can separate us from the love of God. And what you said, the last words of Jesus is, I'm with you always. And so we choose to believe the truth of God's word, even if we struggle to reconcile it with our experience.
There's something I want to just unpack a little bit from your book, and you talk about the counsellor, and you talked about having this tangible experience with God, and it was something to do with a boat. Tell us about that, because I just feel it's so important.
Prior to this, I'd always kind of been like, oh yeah, counsellors, just get the tissues out and da-de-da, and yet I knew I needed some help. Yeah, this woman was really into drawing, so she'd give me a bit of paper and some crayons, and initially I was like, oh, this is insulting, so arrogant. But one time I said to her, I just feel like my life is so turbulent, it's like I'm just out of control. And she said, okay, so draw for me what that means, and so I just draw some waves, like an ocean. And she'd say to me, so are you in the ocean? Are you drowning? And I'm like, no, I'm not drowning. I'm on a boat. So then I drew the boat, and okay, I'm on a boat. I'm not drowning. Okay, so who's in the boat? Yeah, my husband's in the boat with me. Is there anybody else in the boat? Actually, yeah, my kids are down underneath there in the hull or whatever you call it. And who's driving the boat? Like all these really, really probing questions, but was so helpful. And then I said to her, Jesus is driving the boat. And she said, is it just going anywhere? Is it out of control? And I said, no, there's an anchor. There's an anchor. And that whole experience completely changed my perspective that I wasn't drowning in a sea. I was in a boat, I had people with me, and Jesus was at the helm. And I had this lovely phrase that mental stillness comes when I see the captain's view. Yeah. That was a profound experience for me. Yeah. There were many, but that was a really profound one. One of the other ones, Lizzie, that was really hard for me was when Mum was dying. When she was in hospital, I'd bring my speaker in and I'd play some hymns, Christian songs, and I'd be reading and praying. And, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, must be, this is going to be this beautiful transition, from this world to the next. And, this is just going to be lovely. And then she just shouted at me. She just shouted at me, be quiet. And I was just like, it was like someone had just slapped me on the face, And I was really distressed that those were going to be her final words to me. It wasn't, I love you, darling, or thank you for journeying with me, or, you've done so much for me. None of that. It was just, be quiet. When I was trying to do something that I thought was going to provide comfort for her. And that really bothered me because those were her final words to me. So that was a real hurdle as well. another good friend really helped me with this, and she just said, you know, your life is like a book, and that was your mum's final chapter, but it doesn't have to be your final chapter, you know. You've got another chapter after this, and another chapter, and another chapter, and there were chapters before, and really this is just one little part of your life with your mum, and just let it rest there, you know. We have so little understanding of mental illness and how it's a struggle not only for the person but for the caregivers. And there's a lot of people who are caregiving. You know, that whole verse, you've got to run with perseverance the race set out before you. And each one of us has our own race. And I could see myself, I was running in my lane, but I had mum, I was trying to carry her, you know, with me running, and the running was getting too hard, you know, and I felt like God, then I needed to hand her over, that she had her own race and God would carry her. He was, you know, he hadn't abandoned her, but she was to run her own race and I was to be the cheerleader. So I was to urge her on to get to the end of her race, you know, and I think that's for all of us. Each one of us has our own lane. We can't run in somebody else's lane. We can't run with, you know, holding someone else. We've got to run our own race. And that's what I've got at the opening of the book, Run with Perseverance, a race set before you.
So Alison, just in closing today, I mean, I really appreciate everything that you've shared with us and how you've opened your heart and talked about things that are so hard. And even though it's been a few years, right, they still hurt. What would you say to somebody who might be faced with similar circumstances in their life right now around their loved one?
Yeah, I think there is common threads, but everybody's situation, you know, is incredibly different. I mean, for me, obviously, my faith is the anchor. The Word of God, worship, my church family, and of course my own family. You need people. And I think it's a very lonely journey because no one sees what goes on. No one knows the depth of what people do for no thanks and often for abuse. And this was my mother, but I know there are many wives and husbands who are doing this for their spouses and how difficult that must be. But I think self-care is really important. Make sure there are people you can talk to, people you can be honest with. And I think often a lot of us, we're kind of like martyrs. You know, got to do this, you know, and we do it to our own detriment sometimes. So there's that sense of standing back. I remember early on I felt like I was faced with this wall of dementia, and I couldn't find any way around it, you know, and I just kept hitting up against it. And then the counsellor said, just distance yourself from the wall. The wall's not going to go away.
Nice.
You've got to distance yourself from it. And part of that distancing is doing things that are going to, that knowing what things fill your cup.
Yes.
So what fills your cup? For me, it's like getting to the beach, it's going for walks, it's going to cafes. For other people, it's something completely different. But you've got to keep filling your own cup. You've got to know what's going to keep you strong, what's going to keep you in a good headspace and emotionally strong.
What a powerful conversation that was with Alison. I don't know about you, but there was a few times there I was really holding back the tears. And as Alison started to share her journey of her mum, it really took me back to my time with my mum when she was in that nursing home. And it was so hard always to leave her and to see your parent, your loved one who was once vibrant and capable, now it's like the tables have been turned and they've become the child and we've become the parent. Grief's such a hard thing. Nothing prepares you for it. But grief, it's the price you pay for love. And I think it's worth it.